Welcome to today's edition of the show podcast.
The husband and wife duo tell Elisa Bray about dismantling white privilege and misogyny in their music. Bad reviews, ADN why their first album in 4 years has silence at its heart. Tune-yards were pretty sure their fourth album would be their last. I Can Feel You Creep Into My Private Life, released in 2018, fared worse commercially than its predecessors, and singer and chief songwriter Merrill Garbus, having passionately thrown herself into expressing the tricky topics of race and privilege, felt put off. The last album, frankly, didn't do very well, she says on Zoom, turning to her bandmate and husband, bassist Nate Brenner, next to her on the sofa. As if sensing the mood, the duo's chihuahua, Coco, jumps up onto Garbus, who is wrapped up in a blanket and woolly hat on a cool California morning. It's the vulnerability of here's this thing that I've made, and to not be met with universal praise, it's hard to want to do it again. But do it again they did. Both had parents who were working musicians, and their attitude was, "It's our job." So the couple headed to their own rehearsal studio and threw everything into recording, working with live instrumentation instead of computers, playfully jangling keys in place of the hi-hat. They had been stuck apart from a break scoring the 2018 film Sorry to Bother You in a routine, and were desperate to change their methodical songwriting formula. For inspiration, they took cues from Questlove's Guide to Creativity, Creative Quest, and used Brian Eno's oblique strategies, instruction cards that you pick at random. Garbus describes a FK mentality. The quieter Brenner says, "It felt like we were free. Every song we'd start differently. It felt less like a factory." After weeks of exploration, the songs for new album Sketchy were birthed in just a week. The result is a thrilling, high-intensity record of kaleidoscopic exuberance. What we're on a search for is not to be a successful band, adds Garbus. The goal was creativity itself, going back to why did I ever want to make music to begin with? At times, it had been easy to forget. Garbus and Brenner were tired of the constant hustling since their breakthrough Who Kill, an arrestingly rhythmic and catchy experimental album, put them on the map a decade ago. They toured with Arcade Fire and The National and were sleep-deprived from going non-stop from festival to festival, always with one eye on the next album or show and never being present in the moment. Tune-yards had become a grind. I think the speed of capitalism is such that there's no time to examine what systems you're a part of, says Garbus, probing ideas with every answer. We can write music about climate change, and then we get on the plane and burn all this fossil fuel. If you're not careful, you can get the sense that you have no choice and you're just part of this big system. They needed to stop and rediscover their choices. The theme of taking responsibility and considering one's own complicity in the world's problems crops up a lot in Garbus's lyrics. On the previous album's Colonizer, she sang of her own cultural appropriation in weaving African rhythms into the band's polyphonic music. I use my white woman's voice to tell stories of travels with African men. On Sketchy's Homewrecker, she urges the listener to consider their own role in social systems as she sings about benefiting from white supremacy, a pre-approval for a life of wiping history away / a pre-approval for a debt that I will never pay. It feels really important not to incriminate the other all the time, especially as a white person with a lot of privileges, she says. I am a part of this. I wish that wasn't true. The Lo-Fi Nowhere Man was sparked by a furious text from a friend about the Alabama bill banning abortion in May 2019. It contains the damning lyric, "If you cannot hear a woman, then how can you write her song?" It's the feeling of going backward in time, she explains. That sense as a woman that the government has made a decision about your body, it felt like a very important feeling to put down on record. In the wake of Sarah Everard's murder, and the heavy-handed treatment of women by police at the Clapham Common Vigil, it feels particularly resonant. Women in the UK are voicing their own fear of male violence, and anger at not being heard. I think if the songs are resonant, it's because these things have been here for so long, and they're not going away anytime soon, says Garbus. We can say that all genders should be equal. But people aren't practiced in giving over their power. White supremacy has been the culture that we've lived with for hundreds of years. How are white people going to learn to deal with this shift in power? And if we don't, then we get this reactivity from men and from white people. Misogyny is here for a reason. It's built into the system. Garbus has been shaped by rejecting it. In her early womanhood, she refused to stick to gender stereotypes about what a woman is, thanks in part to her mother, who never wore makeup or high heels. A lot of my life was spent trying to cover up being a woman because I felt unsafe to be in that body. I wore my clothes baggy and didn't want to be that for a lot of reasons. Fear of rape honestly being one of them, to not be a pretty girl in this world. I dressed in overalls and whatever color I wanted and cut my hair short, and she let me be who I was, which in retrospect I cannot thank her enough for. Neither of my parents shoved gender upon me. Attending an all-women college in Massachusetts to study theater, she says, gave her still more incentive to not be a frail, pretty girl type. Garbus also railed against the European model of how a traditional woman's voice should sound, which would feed into her own, far gutsier and more androgynous vocals. The women's voices I was listening to just don't sound like that. Nina Simone was a favorite, as was the boldly outspoken Ani DeFranco. Listening to Nowhere Man with its overdriven cacophony of bass, drums, and defiant, fevered vocals put through a megaphone, or the lyrics of Single Hold Yourself, about the human tendency to block out trauma, it is easy to assume that Garbus is angry. She says she is not. I don't think I'm angry. Am I? She asks Brenner, and they both laugh uncertainly. She laments the emotions' connection with women as hysterical and irrational, ruled by hormones. I feel really sad. And I think that anger can hover on top of deep grief. If this all sounds, well, a little intense, Tune-Yards were keen to break up the dense yet joyful onslaught of playful melodies and furiously candid passion. So, bang in the middle they placed a silent track, to shake up and re-engage the listener, just as they themselves were forced to do when the world shut down in the pandemic and Brenner broke his collarbone. A lot of what we need to change will involve slowing down in some way, Garbus says. For the duo, daily meditation creates silence. However uncomfortable, it's to give people that space. I just really hope that, the album, helps people through this time. There's so much to feel and to process. That's my greatest hope.